I opened the door, and at that very moment, I was forcefully shoved inside. 4 men in police uniforms burst into my home, claiming they had the right to detain me. But when I stated my position, their faces turned pale. At that moment, they realized they had just sealed their fate. But let's start from the very beginning. I leaned back in my chair, sipping whiskey on the rocks, and gazed at the city lights outside the window. The evening was peaceful, and I savored this rare break from work. Moments like these made the contrast between the chaos of the courtroom and the silence of my own home even more striking. But the silence was suddenly shattered by a loud, sharp knock at the door. Not just a knock, a demanding, forceful strike. The unexpected noise nearly made me drop my glass. I stood up, clenching my jaw. Whoever it was, they clearly had no intention of simply waiting for an answer. Approaching the door, I peered through the peephole. 4 men stood outside in police uniforms, but something was off. They were too tense, too insistent. One of them had shifty eyes darting from side to side as if expecting a trap. Another, tall and gaunt, stood with his hands in his pockets, an odd stance for an officer on duty. The largest of them, a stocky man with a shaved head, leaned in and pounded on the door again. "Open up! Police!" A deep, authoritative voice rang out. Something inside me tensed. No sirens. No police cars outside. I had lived here long enough to know that real officers didn't operate like this. When they came, they called ahead. They didn't bang on doors like thugs. Taking a deep breath, I slowly and carefully turned the lock. The door opened just a couple of inches. "What's this about?" I asked, my voice steady and controlled. That was all it took. The stocky man, not waiting for an invitation, threw his full weight against the door. The wooden panel slammed into my arm, but there was no point in resisting. The door swung open, and the 4 men rushed inside. I took a step back, watching them. They moved fast and carelessly, like criminals with no regard for personal space. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" My voice remained cold, but anger was already boiling inside me. The stocky man, clearly the leader, gave me a once-over and smirked. "You violated an HOA ordinance," he said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "We have the authority to detain you." "HOA? What ordinance?" My fingers curled into a fist. None of them looked like real law enforcement. Their uniforms were off, cheap knockoffs, no badge numbers, no patches. I could have called the police right then, but for now, I chose to stall. "I need to see your IDs." My tone was calm, but the tension in the air was thick. The stocky man sneered and stepped closer. "We're not here to answer to you," he said, his voice lowering to a warning growl. "You'd best sit tight if you don't want trouble." I stared into his eyes and knew. These weren't cops. They weren't even security. These men were playing pretend, but they were nothing more than pathetic imposters. The only question was, what did they want from me? I took a deep breath, forcing down the boiling anger. These men, so confident, so brazen, actually thought they could barge into my home, threaten me, and walk away without consequences? Slowly, I shifted my gaze to the stocky leader standing across from me, his face twisted in a smug grin. "You do realize that breaking into my house is illegal?" My voice was cold and even, but each word carried the weight of a coming storm. There was no immediate response. Instead, the gaunt, wiry man with sharp, predatory features stepped forward. His eyes burned with anger, and his voice dripped with defiance. "You have no idea who you're messing with," he growled, narrowing his eyes. "We have connections in the administration. We can make your life very difficult." A wave of icy rage rolled down my spine. These men were using the HOA's authority as a tool for intimidation and extortion. How many homeowners had they already robbed? How many families had bent under their threats? Hatred tightened in my chest. The leader pulled out a folded sheet of paper, dramatically unfolded it, and placed it on the table in front of me. "You violated the rules. If you want to settle this peacefully, pay the fine." I glanced at the so-called document. $10,000. Absurd. For what? My voice came out almost lazily, but there was a dangerous glint in my eyes. "Rules are rules," the leader smirked. "Your windows don't meet HOA standards. You're supposed to have blinds, not curtains. Your door lock isn't certified. Security cameras must be approved." I slowly lifted my gaze. "I don't take kindly to threats in my own home," I said quietly but firmly, stepping forward. For a split second, the men tensed. They had expected fear, anger, maybe even pleading, but not this, not cold, controlled certainty. Especially from people who have no idea who they're talking to. The leader raised an eyebrow, then smirked, trying to regain control of the situation. "Oh yeah? And who are you? A senator?" I looked him straight in the eye and slowly, deliberately said, "My name is David Carlisle." A brief pause. "And I am the district attorney." Silence. Heavy. Absolute. It felt like the air in the room had thickened. No one moved. I saw the realization dawn on their faces. They had just broken into the home of a high-ranking prosecutor. They had threatened him, tried to extort him. I saw the thin man's forehead glisten with a cold sweat. The stocky leader clenched his fists, but there was no confidence left in him. The other two exchanged nervous glances, as if only now grasping the disaster they had walked into. Now they understood. And now it was too late. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. I saw the flicker of fear on the impostors' faces, but their instincts still clung to false confidence. They couldn't believe they had screwed up this badly. The leader, the stocky man with the shaved head, blinked, then clenched his fists, trying to summon his former bravado. "Damn it! This doesn't change anything." His voice was hoarse, but the certainty it once held was gone. He was grasping for control, but he had already lost. "You think you can scare us?" He stepped forward, but I had already noticed the twitch at the corner of his mouth and the slight tremor in his fingers. I smirked. "No, but I can put you in prison." Silence. My words hung in the air like a blade, ready to fall. Slowly, I reached for the phone on my desk. The movement was calm, deliberate, final. No one moved. No one knew what to do. "You think we're scared?" One of them barked, the thin guy with a nervous tick. But his voice was shaking. "I think you have 10 seconds to leave," I said, looking at them with an even, emotionless stare. "Or by tomorrow morning you'll be explaining to the police why you impersonated officers and illegally entered private property." I watched as they exchanged glances. The leader's trembling hand reached for his neck as if trying to loosen an invisible noose. They understood. I slowly pulled out a notepad, clicked my pen, and began writing. Fake identification, illegal entry, extortion, intimidation. I pronounced each word clearly, my gaze never leaving the page. "That's at least 3 federal crimes." They started backing toward the door. "Wait," one of them mumbled, raising his hands uncertainly, as if he wanted to say something but knew it was already over. "We can work something out." I looked up. My stare was cold as ice. "You should have thought of that before." The leader was the first to bolt, yanking the door open and rushing into the hallway. The others scrambled after him, hurried and frantic, as if the cops were already on their heels. I listened to the sound of their retreating footsteps, then calmly shut the door and pressed the call button on my phone. Their nightmare was just beginning. The next morning, without wasting any time, I filed an official report with the police and the district attorney's office. I knew all too well that cases like this often got swept under the rug. But not this time. I wasn't going to let them slip away. At the same time, I submitted a complaint to the city administration and the state regulatory agency overseeing HOAs. If anyone thought this would end with a quiet slap on the wrist, they were gravely mistaken. 2 days later, the scandal erupted. News spread quickly across the city. The fake police officers from the HOA, running an extortion scheme with illegal fines and intimidation tactics, had been arrested. The media seized the story. Headlines screamed corruption, fraud, abuse of power. Even those who had hoped to escape unscathed couldn't, because the entire HOA leadership was now under investigation. The HOA tried to cover it up. Their lawyers scrambled like rats on a sinking ship. They issued an official statement distancing themselves from their employees, claiming they had no knowledge of any criminal activity. But the documents I provided exposed their lies. I made sure the leadership was removed from their positions. No one would ever again use false authority to extort honest people. For the first time in a long while, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction in my work. These men thought they could intimidate me? Now, they were the ones living in fear. Neighbors came to me, people I had barely known before, thanking me for putting an end to it. I soon realized I hadn't been their first victim. This gang had terrorized residents for years, issuing fines, shaking people down for money, threatening them with eviction. Many had simply paid up, too afraid of the consequences. But now, it was over. The greatest irony? Sitting in the precinct, across from the investigator, the leader of the gang had the audacity to say he was just following the rules. As I passed by the interrogation room, I paused by the glass. He felt my stare. He looked up, and the smug confidence was gone. He was no longer a predator, just a trapped animal, finally realizing he was no longer in control. I leaned in slightly, my voice calm, cold, and final. Now, you'll have to follow a different set of rules. The ones written in the criminal code. He looked away. I walked out of the station. The case was closed. Justice had been served.